The Scream franchise introduced a fundamentally different kind of horror villain to audiences in 1996. While other iconic monsters possess supernatural powers or superhuman strength, Ghostface represented something far more unsettling, the banality of evil hidden behind a simple mask. This examination explores the psychological complexity, cultural significance, and enduring appeal of a character who proved that the most terrifying monsters might be entirely human. Understanding Ghostface requires moving beyond the mask to examine what it represents: the frightening ease with which ordinary people can commit extraordinary violence, the anonymity that enables cruelty, and the uncomfortable truth that evil doesn't always announce itself with obvious signs. For mature audiences who've witnessed how seemingly normal individuals can harbor dark intentions, Ghostface resonates as perhaps horror's most psychologically realistic villain. Director Wes Craven and screenwriter Kevin Williamson created Scream as both a horror film and commentary on horror films. The characters knew horror movie rules, discussed them explicitly, yet still fell victim to a killer exploiting those very conventions. This self-awareness transformed the genre, making audiences complicit in a way previous horror hadn't attempted. The genius lay in how this meta approach actually increased rather than diminished tension. By acknowledging horror tropes, the film could simultaneously follow and subvert them, keeping audiences uncertain despite their genre knowledge. When characters discuss how the Virgin always survives, we're forced to wonder whether the film will confirm or contradict this rule. Either choice carries meaning. Ghostface emerged from this self-conscious context, perfectly designed for an audience that had seen everything. The mask itself, officially called Father Death, was discovered by production designer Marianne Maddalena in a house being scouted for filming. This mass-produced Halloween decoration became instantly iconic, its elongated features suggesting a screen frozen in time, its blankness allowing viewers to project their own fears onto it. The character's ordinariness proved revolutionary. Ghostface possessed no supernatural abilities, no superhuman strength, no special training. The killers were typically teenagers or young adults, using readily available weapons and relying on surprise rather than power. This accessibility made the threat feel immediate and real. Anyone could be Ghostface, which meant everyone was potentially dangerous. From a psychological perspective, the Ghostface mask enables what researchers call de-individuation, the loss of self-awareness and individual accountability that occurs in groups or when identity is concealed. Studies consistently show that anonymity reduces inhibitions against antisocial behavior, allowing people to act in ways they never would if identifiable. The mask doesn't just hide the killer's identity, it fundamentally transforms their psychological state. Behind the mask, the wearer becomes someone else, freed from normal social constraints and moral considerations. This psychological shift explains how otherwise ordinary individuals can commit horrific acts they're not entirely themselves while masked, operating in a dissociated state where usual ethical boundaries don't apply. The Ghostface costume's availability as mass-market merchandise adds another disturbing dimension. Unlike Michael Myers' unique mask or Jason's hockey mask, Ghostface's disguise can be purchased anywhere. This ubiquity means the killer could literally be anyone, a democratization of evil that makes everyone suspicious and no one safe. The franchise explores this by revealing different killers behind the mask across films. Ghostface isn't one person, but rather a mantle that various individuals assume, each bringing their own motivations while adopting the same methodology. This interchangeability suggests that the capacity for violence exists widely, requiring only the right circumstances and sufficient disinhibition to manifest. Ghostface's signature tactic, terrorizing victims by phone before attacking, adds crucial psychological dimensions. The voice on the phone, provided by Roger L. Jackson, who was kept separated from actors to maintain authenticity, establishes intimacy without visibility, creating confusion about the killer's location and identity. These conversations aren't simply threatening, they're psychologically manipulative. Ghostface engages victims in seemingly casual dialogue about horror movies or their personal lives, creating false sense of safety before revealing knowledge that shouldn't be possessed. This cognitive dissonance-friendly tone delivering terrifying content creates profound unease that direct threats wouldn't achieve. The phone calls also represent violation of private space. Home traditionally represents safety, but when the killer can reach you by phone, that sanctuary is compromised. Modern audiences experiencing constant connectivity might feel this even more acutely. Our devices provide constant access to our attention, making us perpetually vulnerable to unwanted intrusion. The franchise released just as caller ID became common, making anonymous calls feel simultaneously outdated and somehow more menacing. Today, with smartphones providing even more information about callers, the premise requires updating, yet the essential violation remains relevant. Digital communication enables anonymity and harassment in new forms, making Ghostface's tactics feel unfortunately contemporary. Unlike villains with supernatural or pathological explanations, Ghostface killers typically have mundane motivations that make their actions somehow more disturbing. The original film revealed killers driven by abandoned father issues and peer pressure, shockingly banal reasons for murder sprees. This ordinariness suggests that monstrous acts don't require monstrous natures, just human weakness and opportunity. Subsequent films explored various motivations: fame-seeking, revenge for perceived slights, twisted family loyalty, even simple attention-seeking. None of these explanations fully justify the violence, which seems to be the point. The franchise suggests searching for comprehensible motives behind incomprehensible acts might be futile sometimes. People kill for reasons that will never make sense to those outside their distorted perspective. This reflects genuine criminal psychology. While popular culture often portrays killers as masterminds or complete psychopaths, research shows most violent criminals fall into neither category. They're frequently individuals with various psychological issues, poor impulse control, and distorted thinking who make terrible choices. Ghostface killers embody this uncomfortable reality more accurately than most horror villains. The franchise also explores how pop culture influences violence. The original film's killers explicitly modeled their crimes on horror movies, treating murder as performance art. This meta-commentary acknowledges the perennial debate about media violence while refusing to provide simple answers. The films neither endorse nor completely dismiss concerns about fictional violence inspiring real acts. Neve Campbell's Sidney Prescott represents evolution of the final girl trope that had dominated slasher films. Unlike passive victims who merely survived through luck or virginity, Sidney actively fights back, learns from experiences, and develops genuine psychological complexity across the franchise. The first film established Sidney as traumatized by her mother's murder, creating emotional vulnerability that the killers exploit. Yet this trauma ultimately strengthens rather than weakens her. She's already survived devastating loss, making her more resilient than peers who've lived sheltered lives. This psychological realism elevates the character beyond typical horror protagonists. Sidney's journey across 4 films, and eventually 5, explores long-term trauma impact in ways horror rarely attempts. She develops PTSD, struggles with trust, relocates repeatedly seeking safety that never quite materializes. The franchise acknowledges that surviving horror doesn't mean escaping its effects. Trauma persists, shaping choices and relationships years later. For audiences who've experienced trauma or loss, Sidney's characterization resonates far more deeply than invincible action heroes. She's genuinely damaged by her experiences, yet refuses to be defined solely by victimhood. This balance between vulnerability and strength creates compelling, psychologically authentic character whose survival feels earned rather than inevitable. The Scream franchise's most distinctive feature might be its explicit discussion of horror movie rules. Characters debate how to survive based on genre conventions, creating ironic distance while simultaneously increasing tension. Will following the rules save them, or does acknowledging tropes change the game? Randy Meeks, the film-obsessed character played by Jamie Kennedy, serves as the franchise's conscience and commentator, articulating rules like never say, "I'll be right back," virgins survive, and never assume the killer is dead. His lectures function as both homage to horror tradition and warning about its patterns. This self-awareness transforms audience experience. We're not simply watching characters make stupid decisions. We're watching them navigate a situation they understand through the same cultural lens we possess. When they violate rules, we know they know better, making their choices feel more deliberate and their deaths more tragic. The franchise evolves these rules across sequels, with Scream 2 discussing sequel conventions, Scream 3 exploring trilogy conclusions, and Scream 4 addressing reboots. This ongoing commentary keeps the films feeling contemporary while acknowledging how horror itself evolves. The movies become metatextual explorations of their own genre, operating simultaneously as entertainment and criticism. Scream emerged during the mid-1990s when Generation X cultural dominance emphasized irony, self-awareness, and skepticism toward sincerity. The franchise perfectly captured the sensibility characters who took nothing at face value, who processed trauma through pop culture references, who maintained ironic distance even while genuinely terrified. This approach revitalized horror after early 1990s stagnation. The slasher genre had exhausted itself through diminishing returns, becoming self-parody without the franchise's intentional wit. Scream demonstrated that horror could be intelligent, self-aware, and scary simultaneously, opening creative possibilities that influenced countless subsequent films. The franchise also emerged during specific cultural anxieties about youth violence. The Columbine shooting occurred between Scream 2 and 3, forcing uncomfortable reckonings with teen violence that weren't abstract horror movie scenarios. The film's premise, ordinary teenagers committing brutal murders, suddenly felt less fantastical, creating controversy about whether such entertainment was appropriate. Yet the franchise never glorified violence or presented killers sympathetically. The Ghostface killers are consistently revealed as pathetic, their grandiose self-images contrasting sharply with their actual banality. The film suggests that paying attention to these individuals, trying to understand their motives, grants them significance they don't deserve, a provocative stance in a culture obsessed with true crime and criminal psychology. Like most successful horror franchises, Scream eventually faced creative exhaustion. The self-aware premise that felt revolutionary in 1996 became predictable by the third film. The fourth installment attempted updating for social media age, exploring how technology changed both horror conventions and actual violence. Each sequel raised the body count and complexity of killer reveals, creating increasingly convoluted plots that strained credibility. Multiple killers working together, elaborate frame jobs, family connections spanning decades. The mythology grew more complicated while the scares diminished. Familiarity bred not contempt exactly, but reduced fear. The franchise's greatest weakness might be its central conceit. Once audiences understand they should expect meta-commentary and rule-breaking, those elements lose surprise. The films became exercises in anticipating which conventions would be followed or subverted, intellectual puzzles more than visceral horror. Smart, entertaining puzzles, certainly, but operating more on cerebral than primal level. The 2022 reboot, technically titled Scream, but functioning as a fifth installment, attempted addressing these issues by targeting toxic fandom and recall culture. The film examined how audiences' relationships with beloved franchises can become obsessive and entitled, with killers motivated by anger over deviation from their preferred vision. This self-reflexive approach worked because it acknowledged the franchise's own aging while exploring why these stories persist. The Ghostface mask became one of the most recognizable images in popular culture, appearing everywhere from Halloween costumes to parody references to genuine crime. This ubiquity created strange relationship where the symbol of fictional terror became mundane through overexposure, both reducing its power and somehow making it more unsettling through familiarity. The mask's commercial success raised questions about commodifying horror. When children wear Ghostface costumes without understanding the film's content, when the image appears on merchandise ranging from t-shirts to air fresheners, does the symbol lose meaning? Or does widespread recognition actually enhance horror? Everyone knows what Ghostface represents, making the mask carry instant dread regardless of context. There's also disturbing reality that the mask has been used in actual crimes. Perpetrators have worn Ghostface costumes during robberies and assaults, exploiting both the disguise and psychological impact of recognizable horror imagery. This blurring of fiction and reality creates uncomfortable questions about media, influence that the franchise itself explicitly examines without resolving. The mask's blank expression allows projection of various emotions. Depending on lighting and angle, it can appear sad, menacing, mocking, or confused. This ambiguity makes it more versatile and somehow more human than rigidly fixed expressions. We can imagine different mental states behind it, making every encounter feel potentially unique even when involving the same mask. While actors playing the physical killers receive credit, Roger L. Jackson's voice work as Ghostface deserves recognition as equally essential to character effectiveness. His delivery balances casual friendliness with underlying menace, creating cognitive dissonance that makes the phone calls genuinely unsettling despite audiences knowing they're fictional. Jackson's performance choices, the slight rasp, the elongated vowels, the shifts between playful teasing and sudden aggression create distinct personality, despite the character's anonymity. The voice becomes as recognizable as the mask, instantly conveying threat while maintaining almost seductive charm. He makes talking to the killer seem dangerously appealing, explaining why victims engage rather than immediately hanging up. The decision to keep Jackson separated from actors during filming proved crucial. By never meeting the person behind the voice, actors responded with genuine uncertainty and unease. This authentic fear translates to screen, making their terror feel more real than if they'd been delivering lines to a familiar colleague in a costume. The voice's impact demonstrates that horror often works best through suggestion and psychological manipulation rather than explicit violence. Ghostface's power comes not primarily from the knife but from the mind games, the invasion of privacy, the revelation of secrets that shouldn't be known. Jackson's vocal performance enables this psychological warfare, making him arguably more essential to the character's success than any individual physical performer. Scream's success revitalized horror cinema after mid-1990s doldrums. The film proved that intelligent, self-aware horror could achieve both critical respect and commercial success, inspiring numerous imitators while raising genre standards. It demonstrated that audiences wanted more than rote repetition of tired formulas. They craved innovation even within established conventions. The franchise influenced horror broadly by normalizing metatextual approaches. Films began explicitly acknowledging genre awareness, creating sophisticated relationships with audience expectations. This evolution produced more complex horror that operated on multiple levels, simultaneously scary for those seeking simple thrills, intellectually engaging for those wanting subtext. Scream also contributed to what might be called respectable horror films that garnered mainstream attention beyond genre enthusiasts. The talented cast, including established actors, sharp dialogue, and cultural commentary, made the films feel substantial rather than exploitative. This helped horror continue moving toward critical legitimacy while maintaining genre pleasures. The franchise's treatment of the final girl trope influenced subsequent horror protagonists. Sidney Prescott's combination of vulnerability and capability, her realistic trauma responses, and her refusal to be defined solely by victimhood established new standards for female horror characters. While not every film followed this model, the possibilities had been expanded beyond simplistic virgin-victim dichotomies. Contemporary audiences experience Ghostface's core themes: anonymity enabling cruelty, invasive communication, uncertainty about others' intentions, with perhaps greater intensity than 1996 viewers could have anticipated. Social media harassment, doxing, swatting, and various forms of online abuse demonstrate how anonymity facilitates behavior people would never engage in face-to-face. The franchise's exploration of how masks enable violence resonates in an age where digital anonymity serves similar psychological function. Behind screen names and avatars, people say and do things that would be unthinkable if their real identities were attached. The internet provides masks as effective as Ghostfaces for disinhibiting aggressive impulses. The phone call tactics establishing false intimacy before revealing threat mirror modern catfishing, social engineering, and various online manipulation strategies. The killer's possession of private information about victims parallels contemporary privacy concerns about data collection and surveillance. What felt like movie convenience in 1996 now seems prescient about how technology would enable new forms of predation. The franchise's theme that anyone could be the killer feels especially relevant in our polarized era where neighbors, family members, and former friends can suddenly seem like strangers harboring incomprehensible beliefs and intentions. The shock of discovering someone you thought you knew is capable of terrible things central to every Ghostface reveal resonates with communities torn apart by political and cultural divisions. Ghostface endures because the character represents perhaps the most unsettling truth horror can convey: that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary evil, and that the capacity for violence exists far more widely than we'd like to acknowledge. Unlike supernatural monsters who represent externalized fears, Ghostface embodies internal human darkness, making the threat feel immediate and inescapable. For audiences aged 35 to 60, who've lived long enough to witness how people they knew became capable of shocking acts, who've seen communities torn apart by conflicts that escalated beyond reason, who understand that nice and good aren't synonymous, Ghostface resonates as uncomfortably realistic. We know the mask is just costume, but we also know what humans can do when they believe themselves hidden from accountability. The franchise's lasting power lies in refusing easy answers. It doesn't explain away evil through trauma, supernatural influence, or clear pathology. Instead, it suggests that violence often emerges from banality, wounded egos, petty grievances, warped desire for significance. This lack of grand explanation somehow makes the horror more profound. If killers don't need elaborate motivation, then the line between normal and murderous might be thinner than we'd like to believe. Ultimately, Ghostface succeeded by making horror intimate and human. The mask could be worn by anyone, meaning anyone could be the threat. This democratization of evil, the recognition that monsters don't announce themselves with obvious signs, creates persistent unease that outlasts the films themselves. We close our doors at night knowing that danger, if it comes, will likely arrive wearing a familiar face or, perhaps worse, a mask that could hide any face at all. When we hear a phone ring unexpectedly, when we notice someone watching us, when we realize we're alone in a vulnerable situation, we're experiencing the fears Ghostface codified and crystallized. He represents not specific threat, but rather ambient anxiety about human unpredictability, the knowledge that we can never fully know others' intentions or capabilities. And that uncertainty, more than any knife or mask, is what makes Ghostface one of horror's most psychologically sophisticated and perpetually unsettling creations. The real horror isn't what the mask hides, it's recognizing that anyone could be hiding behind it.